The political compass. It's a crude measurement of where you stand politically, which has found favour online because it's not just measured on a left-right axis, but also an authoritarian versus libertarian axis, which gives you a much more accurate idea of where someone stands in the current political paradigm. Even so, it's an online quiz. It shouldn't be taken too seriously, but it is useful. So the political compass takes place on a square divided into 4 quadrants and with 2 axes. So here's the compass divided into 4 quadrants with the left to right axis emphasized. On the left you will find labour movements, socialist movements, and so on. On the right you will find more conservative, traditionalist and capitalist systems. Meanwhile, the vertical axis runs from authoritarian at the top to libertarian at the bottom. That's a small L libertarian. Basically, more government, more imposition, more authority at the top, less government, less authority, more personal autonomy at the bottom. Now this can all get a bit confused because there are different kinds of rights, and it can be necessary for a government to intervene in order to guarantee people's rights or equalities or whatever else, but still overall the whole thing acts as a kind of sorting hat, read another book, into which we can divide ourselves into our various political camps and understand our interrelationships with each other. The top left is the authoritarian left. This is your Stalins, your Maos, and so on. In the top right you have your authoritarian right. Now I'm using extreme examples because they better help identify the differences between these quadrants. So here you might find Hitler, or Mussolini, or Augusto Pinochet. Authoritarian right, traditionalist, conservative, and often capitalist groups. In the bottom left we find our left libertarians. This is anarchists, this is thinkers like Chomsky, this is Marxism in theory but not in practice. This is fully automated luxury communism. And finally we have the libertarian right. This is the dog-eat-dog kind of world. This is the Randroids, this is the anarcho-capitalist and extremist libertarians. These are the kinds of people that think you should just dump a load of handguns in a nursery and let nature take its course. I'm exaggerating. Slightly. Which brings us in a roundabout way, I suppose, to why I'm making this video, and that's because I've taken quite a lot of heat, quite a lot of flack for being critical of Karl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, and UKIP. In particular, my assertion that they are not liberal. So how can we tell? Well, we can use the political compass as a crude measure to plot out where these things are, and to demonstrate why I don't think you can be a liberal and support UKIP. Here's where Karl sits according to the last political compass video of his that I could find, and we can see that he's on the libertarian right, but only slightly to the right, and only slightly libertarian. All in all, he's a centre-right libertarian. Not that extreme, really, in relatively good company. However, this is where UKIP sat in 2017 according to their policies. And according to most analysts, they've moved further right, though they might be slightly more libertarian at the moment, but this is the last full-on plot that we have for them. And you can see what a considerable distance there is between Karl's professed position and UKIP's political position. It's a gulf between the two. Just how big of a gulf that is might be hard to understand. So let's plot some other things on here to show how big of a difference it is. There's Noam Chomsky, bottom left, well-known academic, syndicalist, anarchist thinker, right? So if we apply the same gulf to Chomsky as exists between Sargon and UKIP, what do we get? Now, if we apply the same political gulf, what we discover is that the closest thing to where Chomsky would end up would be Pakistan. Pakistan is a fairly authoritarian Islamic republic. And if anyone thinks that Chomsky would have any real truck with an authoritarian theocracy, I think they have another thing coming. While we're at it, for shits and giggles, let's add Marx. Now this is Marxism as it was originally theorised and the end state in which it would supposedly end up, not the regimes that have called themselves Marxist. But okay, let's apply that same gulf there. Well, after we shift Karl Marx by the same amount, what do we find? We find that Marxism shifted by the same amount of difference between Karl's position and UKIP's position, puts it worryingly close to Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, who ran a brutal dictatorship that embraced inequality, basically the antithesis of Marxist theory. Now you might point out that many alleged Marxist governments end up in that kind of position, but that's a fail state of Marxism. The point here is of comparing what exists at that same shift to where Karl and UKIP are, and you can see that there is a humongous difference. So just for shits and giggles, here's me, so you know where I'm coming from politically, though you probably should know that already. So what can we conclude from all this? Well, just because UKIP is far-right authoritarian doesn't mean that they don't necessarily have a couple of more liberal policies. Well, one, really, and that's their stance on free speech and free expression. That's it. That appears to be all that Karl cares about, other than Brexit, and that's an unfathomable position in and of itself. But you have to look at why and how UKIP wants to go about extending free expression. Their interim manifesto talks about just removing the Equalities Acts wholesale. Now, while there are aspects of those acts that do perhaps go too far in promoting unequal hiring and unequal protections before the law, if you just rip the whole thing out, that leaves people free completely to be discriminatory and horrible on the basis of gender, gender identity, race, you name it, really. And those protections also apply to racial majorities, to what's assumed to be the oppressor gender, and all the rest of it. So those protections are equal. So if you remove that, it's then going to be wholesale. An opportunity for anyone and everyone to discriminate in any way they see fit. The return of no dogs, no blacks, no Irish outside pubs, without anything to replace that anti-discrimination legislation. So while at first flush it might seem like a liberal policy amongst a sea of authoritarian conservatism, but when you look at what they actually want to do and why they want to do it, it becomes pretty clear that that's not the case. So I'm forced to conclude from this that Karl just isn't being genuine. There is too much completely at odds with his supposed liberal centrist position, any liberal position, for this to be genuine. If he truly only cares about that one single issue of Brexit, he would be better off in the Brexit party. But then even they wouldn't have him. Look, at the end of the day, UKIP is just a mess of contradictions. They claim to want to defend democracy while trying to force through an illegal and corrupted referendum. They say they want free speech, and they've gone out to recruit free speech activists from the internet, but the consequence of their free speech ideas would be a massive increase in legal discrimination against people of all kinds of groups. Further, in their 2017 manifesto and elsewhere, they've said they want to legislate against online bullying, cyberstalking, and so on. It's not exactly the great libertarian defenders of the internet that you might think they would be. And if we're outside the EU, we have less free speech protections, less protections against these kinds of overreach. It just doesn't make any sense. Ironically, I think Sargon and Dankula and others represent entryism, which they've decried when it comes to the left. Zhang.